is always a pleasure for me to come back, to come to La Salle Community Fellowship. And every time I have an invitation to come here, my entire family likes to come. But this time, my wife told me, "You haven't given me enough planning time, so sorry." But she says hi, and we hope that next time I come back here, she can be with us. I am very happy for this invitation, as I mentioned earlier. I was a little bit slow to respond this time. It's because the invitation came after 2 weeks vacation, going back to the office, got buried in reading emails, so I missed the invitation. But I'm happy that somebody drew my attention to the invitation so I can be here this morning. As you know, as I think all of you or most of you would know, my name is Ari Snell, originally from Haiti. I am the coordinator for the program that is responsible for sponsoring refugees here at MCC Manitoba. I have been there for 4 years now. Our thoughts are all with the Cochrane family this morning, and I pray for a prompt recovery for Pastor Kelly so that he can soon be back here to continue his important ministry here at La Salle. I was made aware of the planned theme for today, and I didn't like to break your plan. I decided I would stay with it. So the planned theme was making sense of suffering. Well, I'm very happy that Darren already acknowledged this is not an easy theme. It is a little bit ambitious, trying to pretending to make sense of suffering. However, it is indeed a topic worthy of exploring, worthy of talking about, and the Bible does tell us some things. I don't think we have all the answers we would have hoped for, but I will stick to the book of Job this morning, and in particular, chapter 1, and then we will see what the Bible tells us about sufferings in that chapter. If my information is correct, last Sunday, Elton Da Silva was here, and he preached about essential theologies for living well. And one of those essential theologies was the theology of suffering. And basically, about that particular point, he told you, well, suffering is inevitable in this world. You better know that, and you better realize that this is the reality. No matter what we do, sufferings will always be part of this world. So let's try to understand how we can cope with it as Christians. So my sermon this morning will go a little bit deeper as far as this particular point of last Sunday's sermon is concerned. You know, we're living in a wonderful world. Everything is not dark, everything is not doom and gloom. We need to realize that God created a good place for us. God did not put us in this world as the worst part of the universe. No, God created a beautiful garden, and in it he placed the first man and the first woman, and God's original intention for life to have been good and for us to have been happy. Now we know things have changed, but we need to recognize that this is our Father's world. Despite all that is going around us, this is still God's world, and everything that God created is good. We need to acknowledge that. And in particular, in this 21st century, this is a good time, some people say, to be alive. And I tend to agree with them. I know there are things we can and we should complain about, but we need to acknowledge that we have a lot of good things. I was thinking about a few of them, a few of the good things we have in this world. I try to write down some of them. Friends, we have to be happy for friends. Friends are blessings. Families, family members, those are great things that God has given us. A church community, where we have people who are watching one another, encouraging one another, so that we can travel this not so easy spiritual road together. This is a blessing. Good food, those are good things we have in this world. Nice places to visit and enjoy. I'm thinking about beaches and parks and so on. Celebrations like birthdays, weddings, anniversaries, graduations. A lot of good things are going on. Jobs, we have to be happy. God gave us work so that we can feel a sense of purpose in this world. Those are great things. Some of us have nice houses. I have seen some of them. It's good in a place like Canada. God gives us warm places to stay, warm shelters, and money. And some of us have quite a bit of it. We have to be thankful to God for all those good things. However, this is not a reason to ignore the not so good things, the bad things around us. And this makes life a little confusing. While I have just talked about these so many great things we have in this world, but when I look at every one of them, every one of the good things, I could also think some of the bad things associated with them. I talked about friends, but some people decide not to be our friends. For whatever reason, they decide they would be our enemies, and we don't know why. It would be unrealistic to believe that the entire world is our friend. No, we do have people, for whatever reason, who choose not to be our friends. We do have enemies, and if every human being were our friend, we know that we have an enemy. The devil is our enemy. I talked about family, but some of us don't have families. Some of us don't have families because they have chosen not to have an immediate family, but some have wanted to have a family, but they have not been able to have this desire fulfilled. And this can be a source of frustration. While the same thing is a blessing for others, it can be the opposite for some other people. I talked about church community, but we know that not everybody belongs to a church or any community at all. Some people are isolated, don't have people to sit with, to talk to go to when they feel discouraged. I talked about good food in this country, but you know there is a lot of starvation going on around the world. Some people have not been able to taste much food, let alone good food. Good food is maybe a concept they don't even have. Some people have never enjoyed the nice places, as I mentioned earlier. Sometimes instead of celebrations that I mentioned earlier, anniversaries, birthdays, and weddings and graduations, you know what people are going through? They are going through funerals. Unfortunately, those are not so good things. Some people have no jobs. And sometimes they have a job, but their job can be a source of great frustration and sufferings, unfortunately. I talked about vehicles, but we all know those nice vehicles can also be sources of many accidents, and that cause a lot of trouble. I talked about money, but we know poverty is around. Even in this great city, Canadian city, there is a lot of poverty going on. So this makes life confusing. There are good things, and there are bad things. And among the bad things, in addition to what I mentioned earlier, is diseases. In this country, I find it difficult. When I was in Haiti, I realized that we were in a third world country. It wasn't. I had an explanation for why some diseases are so prevalent, so many people are sick and so on. But I came to Canada, I realized that the diseases are different, but we have sick people here too. Our technology, our development, our money, our great hospital and doctors that do not prevent us from experimenting disease. And we know the disease and all the bad things that I mentioned earlier, they cause a lot of sufferings. They cause physical sufferings, emotional sufferings, spiritual sufferings, and sometimes all at the same time. And maybe as I'm speaking this morning, some of us may be exactly in a position where you're going through some sufferings. Maybe this is a time you are personally experimenting some sufferings. And when sufferings come like that, there are two questions that seem to be unavoidable. We cannot help but ask these questions. One question is why. We do, in the middle of our sufferings, and when sufferings are around us, we do ask the question why. We ask why these sufferings. We ask why these sufferings now? Why now? We do ask the questions why me? Why my family? Why my friends? We also ask the question why does God allow all this to happen? We have a lot of why questions that we ask, and unfortunately, we cannot help us but ask those questions. Also, there is another question we ask. After we ask all these whys, we ask what to do in a situation like that. Via the book of Job, I believe that God seems to tell us give us a few answers about this question. So let us look at the question why. Why these sufferings? Why now? Why me? Why does God allow that? Now, the human brain is good at coming up with answers. This is our sense of creativity that God gives us. That's how science develops. Science develops by, first of all, somebody asks the question, how can we do that? Or what is the cause of that? And then the human brain will quickly come with a hypothesis. And then now the scientists will go and then check this hypothesis to see if this is true. And then until it becomes a law or the rule. So our brain does try to answer the question of why around suffering. And sometimes we are tempted to believe maybe this is happening because we have done something wrong. So the question is here, all these sufferings, are they because you or me have done something wrong? And my answer to this question this morning, in the light of what we read in the first chapter of Job, is not necessarily so. I am not denying this morning that our actions cannot have bad consequences, but it would be a poor theology, too quick of an answer to a question to say, well, if you're suffering, if you're going through this difficult time, it is undoubtedly because you have done something wrong. I think this is not necessarily the case. And why do I say that? I think this is clearly shown to us in the book of Job. Job, what do we read about him? He was a blameless and upright man. Job, nobody had any complaint about Job. Job never did anything bad to anybody. Job treated every fellow human being well. He didn't steal people's money. He was rich, but his riches was his blessings from God, not because he stole people's property or money or fooled people to become rich. Job was blameless and upright, and yet he went through the worst kind of suffering one can ever imagine. And you know, this is exactly what Job's friend didn't understand. Those friends have difficult names. You can go through the book and then see their names. Those three friends, they came to Job. They were good. As soon as they heard that Job was sick, they made a point to come and see him to comfort him. And the text says that they sat with him with their clothes torn for 7 days and 7 nights. They were good friends. But there is one thing they didn't understand. They were trying to convince Job, well, we all know that you are a good guy, a fine man, but maybe we missed it. Maybe you did something only you know, nobody know. Because God doesn't punish good men. You must have done something wrong somewhere. But we all know they were wrong. That wasn't necessarily the reason why Job was suffering. So this morning, if your brain is trying to tell you that your sufferings are causes of your bad behavior or something you have done, you can better answer that question than I. However, let me remind you that part of the devil's strategy is to do exactly that, to make you believe that you deserve these sufferings because of what you did. But this morning we know this may not be necessarily the case. Another reason sometimes our brain or people around us will try to let us to believe as causes of our sufferings is because God is angry with us. So when are we suffering? Is it because we have done something that has angered God? Have we done something that make him mad at us at this point? And would that be the reason why we are suffering? And my answer to this question, and I think your answer to the question should be also not necessarily so. And how do we know that? The text tells us that Job feared God, and he tried his very best to have nothing to do with evil. And in fact, God testifies himself that he was very pleased with Job, and he even boasted about Job. Job didn't do anything as far as this text is concerned to anger God, and for sure his sufferings were not a result of God's anger toward him. Let me also remind you that your brain will try to let you know, to tell you, well, if you're suffering, it's because you've done something wrong. You haven't served God properly. Maybe you cheated on your tithings. Maybe you didn't. You were not faithful in your ministry in the church. God must not be happy with you. That's why you are suffering. It is not necessarily the case. That would be bad theology to always draw this conclusion when somebody is suffering. This is also a strategy of the devil to make you doubt God. That's what he tried the very first time he was going to induce human beings to sinning. He made Adam and Eve doubt God. So this morning, watch your mind about that. I remember in 2010, in January, actually today's the 14th, 2 days ago, 12 years, 2 days ago, the horrible earthquake hit Haiti. And in the same month, I went to Haiti because my wife was still there. And one of the evenings while I was there, I went to a church service that was in the community. I remember I was never angry at a preacher as I was at that time. Here is what was happening. A lot of preachers, right after the earthquake in Haiti, all they were trying to tell the Haitian people, this has happened because we've done so much evil, God is angry at us. Well, the counseling part of my training said, man, that's not the time to be telling the people that, even if that was the case. And how do you know that was the case? Earthquake is part of life in this world. Earthquake, I'm not saying that Haitians are not sinning, are not sinners. We are all sinners. But are they the worst sinners on the face of this earth? Are there no sin in Manitoba where we never have earthquake? So this will happen. Our brain will tell us, people around us will try to tell us, you have made God mad. That's why this is happening. I'm cautioning you this morning, if this ever comes to your mind, again, it is your responsibility to analyze, to criticize your own life, your own Christian life, your relationship with God. But don't let people who are so quick to tell you it's because God is mad at you, because it may not be the case. It certainly was not the case in the case of Job. Is it because God doesn't care about us when there are sufferings? When we are suffering, is it because God simply didn't cause it? We didn't do anything wrong to him. He's not mad, but he just doesn't care. Would that be the case? I would say this morning to this question, certainly not so. Certainly not the case. Again, staying in the book of Job, we have no evidence that God didn't care about Job. In fact, who started the conversation about Job? Now I know this is another contentious point in the text. Why would God start that conversation with a guy like Satan? And then, because this is everything, everywhere, this is where everything started. But what I am trying to let you know this morning, God did not, God was mindful, constantly mindful of Job. Job was in God's mind constantly. God was very mindful of Job. Out of all the people on the earth, Job's name was constantly in God's mind. God affectionately referred to God affectionately referred to Job as his servant. When he started the conversation with Satan, yeah, have you noticed my servant Job? And then started talking good about Job. God was not mindless about Job. And certainly this morning, if this is the case that you are suffering, sometimes we will feel that God feels very far away. There is nothing happening here right now in my life that is telling me that God is with me. But what I can tell you is that God is a good father. He never forgets about his children. God certainly doesn't. We certainly don't go through sufferings because God doesn't care about us. Here is another thing. We are going through sufferings in life. Is it because God is a cruel God? Some would try to suggest that. Some would say God is not, after all, such a good God as we think. He created us in this world, but he put all kinds of catastrophes, disasters in this world for us to go through all these diseases. Is he a good God? Well, my answer to this question, yes, God is a good God. And of course, no, we are not going through sufferings because God is a cruel God. If there was one person who could have charged God with wrongdoing, it was Job. But Job did not charge God with wrongdoing. Job believed that suffering through the suffering through which he was going were not reason for him to doubt about God's goodness and God's love for him. He went through the most horrible sufferings we could ever imagine, but he still, as we read in the text, did not charge God with wrongdoing. And finally, we are going through suffering. Is it because God is not in control of what is happening in this world? And some people seem to suggest that. There are some theologians out there, they will say, yes, God created the world, but he is not in control of every activity going on, everything going on in this world. Well, to such a question, we say absolutely no. Despite his situation, Job believed that God was in control. He knew that God gave him all that he had, and none of it, losing all of it, was not a reason for him to doubt God. He knows that God gave him what he had, and God has taken them away, and this wasn't a permission for him to doubt God, to believe that God was not in control. And one thing he also knows is that none of what he had could be taken away without God's permission. It was taken away, but we know Satan had that conversation with God. Satan was not able to do anything unless what God permitted him to do. So then why? We still have the question, why? Why is there sufferings in the world? Well, let me tell you, let me suggest this morning, we have all these sufferings in the world is because, unfortunately, Satan is still at work. A day will come when Satan will no longer be the prince of this world. He will be vanquished and put away forever. But unfortunately, this time has not come yet. Satan's plan is to spoil everything good that God created. Everywhere God expects joy, harmony, and peace, Satan is working hard so that there be sadness, chaos, and sufferings. God created this world to be a happy place for human beings, but unfortunately, the devil has converted this world, into a place of suffering. I'm suggesting this morning that Satan is the reason for the sufferings in this world. Satan is the reason for the sufferings in this world because he is trying his very best to put us in a situation to doubt of God's power, of God's goodness, of God's love. And this is exactly what he's trying to do. And he introduced sin in this world so that we can pay the consequences of sin, which is death. Everything. And unfortunately, as I said earlier, Satan is still at work, very much at work in this world. The time hasn't come yet where he will be put away. So we need to keep in mind there will be, as long as there is life in this world, as long as we are in this world, we will know suffering. So the question then, what to do? What to do in a situation like that? Well, when we are going through sufferings, I would suggest that we do everything that we can. If God give us great professionals, medical doctors, so let's go to see our doctors. Let's go to see our counselors. Let's do everything that we can to alleviate our sufferings. Let us support one another. Let us pray with one another, including let us pray God and let us tell him to take away our sufferings. Let's do everything that we can. God gives us a lot of resources to use when we are going through sufferings in this world. A lot of resources. Let us acknowledge the resources that God has given us, and then let us use them. But there is one thing we should never do, and this is don't let these world sufferings destroy your faith in God. Because the day you do so, the devil will win. And he and his fallen angels will have a big party. They will celebrate. I pray this morning that we do not let Satan realize his goal of separating us from the love of God, of making us doubt of God's love for us. I would suggest that this morning, no matter what we are going through, don't stop glorifying the name of the Lord. Let us not stop singing, "Blessed be the name of the Lord." Let us do like Job. No matter what we are going through, let us not stop praising God. And I would say this morning, if Job did it, maybe we can do it too. Job was a human being like us. There was nothing special about him than we don't have. God didn't create him special in a special way compared to us. We are all created in the image of God. And I would say, sometimes you could say, well, it depends on the level of sufferings. And I would still respond, if Job was able to continue to praise God after all he went through, maybe we can do the same. Because honestly, I don't know if you know anybody who has gone through as much sufferings as Job has. In one day, he lost everything that he had, including his health. So friends, let me ask you this morning, are you or someone close to you going through some sufferings right now? Have you lost the most precious thing you ever had? Are you in a period in your life where you keep receiving bad news after bad news after bad news? Are you going through what you would consider the worst time in your life? And then the people closest to you are trying to convince you that it is your fault, while you know it is not your fault. You haven't done anything wrong. Are you at that point in your life where all you feel like doing is cursing God and die? Well, let me remind you that your sufferings are not necessarily your own fault. They could be, but not necessarily. Your sufferings don't necessarily mean that God is angry at you. Let me remind you also that the sufferings you are going through are certainly not evidences that God has forgotten you. The sufferings you are enduring don't absolutely mean that God is not good. God is always good. The sufferings in your life certainly don't mean that God is not in control of what is happening in this world. So, therefore, if there are sufferings among us today, let us do everything in our power to alleviate these sufferings, including, as I mentioned earlier, praying God and ask Him for healing. But let us never, ever lose faith in God. Because after all, when everything is said and done, only God will remain. So may God bless each of us this morning, and may God bless the entire community of La Salle.